Welcome to Bedtime Biographies. Tuck yourself in, let your shoulders relax, feel the bed beneath you and take a slow, deep breath. Tonight we'll drift gently through time, to a land of golden sand and ancient secrets. Let the world outside fade, let your thoughts grow quiet. Come with me to Egypt. Close your eyes. Picture yourself floating down the Nile River. The warm breeze carries the scent of lotus blossoms. The gentle water rocks your boat like a cradle. In the distance, pyramids rise against a golden sunset. This is a land where gods walked among mortals, where queens commanded fleets of ships, where love and power danced through palace halls. Tonight, I want to tell you the story of Egypt's most famous queen. Her name was Cleopatra the Seventh. She was the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Settle into your pillows. Let my voice carry you to a time long ago, a time of mystery, a time of beauty. This is Cleopatra's story. It begins in Alexandria, where the sea kisses the Nile. Picture Alexandria as it was over 2,000 years ago. The city sparkled like a jewel beside the sea. White marble buildings rose toward the sky. Their columns caught the morning sunlight and reflected it in dancing patterns. The famous lighthouse of Alexandria stood tall and proud. Its beacon guided ships safely to harbor. Just as this story will guide you gently toward peaceful sleep, can you smell the salt air mixing with exotic spices? Merchants from across the known world brought their treasures here. Silk from China rustled in the breeze. Precious stones from India caught the light like captured rainbows. The aroma of cinnamon and frankincense drifted through the marketplace. Close your eyes and breathe in these ancient scents. In the heart of this magnificent city stood the great palace. It was built of gleaming white stone and precious marble. Gardens filled with date palms and fig trees provided cool shade. Fountains bubbled softly in hidden courtyards. The sound of water was everywhere, gentle and constant, like your own breathing as you listen to this tale. The palace was home to the Ptolemy family. They had ruled Egypt for 300 years. Their bloodline stretched back to Alexander the Great's general. Ptolemy I had founded this dynasty. Each ruler took the name Ptolemy. Each queen was called Cleopatra. But the Cleopatra of our story would be different. She would be the last and the most remembered. It was in this palace that our Cleopatra was born. The year was 69 BCE. Winter winds blew gently across the Mediterranean. Inside the royal chambers, soft linen curtains fluttered. Oil lamps cast warm golden light on painted walls. The walls told stories of ancient gods and goddesses. Isis spread her protective wings. Horus watched with his falcon eyes. These divine beings would watch over the newborn princess. Can you picture the baby Cleopatra? She lay in a cradle made of precious cedar wood. Linen softer than silk wrapped her tiny body. Her dark eyes already held a spark of intelligence, the same intelligence that would make her legendary. Royal nurses sang gentle lullabies in the ancient Egyptian language. Their voices rose and fell like the Nile's eternal flow. The palace filled with the sounds of celebration. Musicians played harps and flutes. The melodies drifted through marble halls like whispered prayers. Servants scattered flower petals on the floors. Rose and jasmine mingled their perfumes in the air. The scent was sweet and intoxicating, like the essence of happiness itself. Cleopatra's father was Ptolemy XII. People called him Orleats, which means the flute player. He loved music almost as much as he loved power. Her mother's identity remains a mystery. Perhaps she was Cleopatra V, another queen whose name has faded with time. In royal families, names often repeated like echoes in marble halls. As a baby, Cleopatra heard many languages around her. Greek was the language of the royal court. Her ancestors had always spoken Greek, but she also heard Egyptian from the servants, Latin from Roman visitors, Hebrew from Jewish merchants, Arabic from desert traders. These languages would become her gift. She would speak 9 languages fluently, a skill that would serve her well in the dangerous game of politics. The nursery where she spent her early days faced the harbour. Through tall windows, she could see ships arriving and departing. Their white sails looked like clouds floating on blue water. The sight must have planted dreams in her young mind. Dreams of distant lands and great adventures. Dreams that would shape her destiny. At night, her nurses would carry her to the palace roof. There, under a canopy of stars, they would tell her stories. Stories of her ancestors, stories of the gods, stories of Egypt's glorious past. The constellations wheeled overhead like a celestial crown. The same stars that watched over pharaohs for thousands of years now watched over this special child. Can you feel the warm desert breeze on your face? It carried the scent of the Nile, rich mud and growing things. Life itself flowing from the heart of Africa to the sea. This was the breath of Egypt, the essence of the land that would be hers to rule. Even as a baby, she was breathing in her inheritance. As Cleopatra grew from baby to child, her education began. Picture her as a little girl with bright, curious eyes. She wore simple linen tunics during the day. Her dark hair was braided with gold threads. Precious amulets hung around her neck for protection. The Eye of Horus, the Ankh of eternal life. These symbols connected her to Egypt's divine power. Her tutors were the wisest scholars in Alexandria. They came from the great library. This library was the wonder of the ancient world. It held more scrolls than any other place on earth. Imagine walking through its corridors with young Cleopatra. Your footsteps echo on marble floors. Sunlight streams through high windows. It illuminates countless papyrus scrolls arranged on wooden shelves. The scholars taught her to read and write. First in Greek, her family's language. The letters looked like dancing figures on papyrus. Then came hieroglyphs, the sacred writing of Egypt. She was the first Ptolemy ruler to learn this ancient script. Each symbol was a tiny picture, a bird, an eye, a lotus flower. Together they told the stories of the gods. Can you picture her small fingers holding a reed pen? She dipped it carefully in black ink. Her tongue peeked out in concentration as she formed each letter. The scratching of reed on papyrus was the only sound in the study, except for the distant murmur of the sea and the soft rustle of palm fronds in the garden breeze. Mathematics came next. She learned to calculate using Egyptian numerals. How many bushels of grain would feed the people? How many soldiers could march from Memphis to Thebes? Numbers were the language of power. They told her the size of her future kingdom, the wealth of her future treasury, the strength of her future armies. Philosophy filled her afternoons. She read the works of Plato and Aristotle. Their ideas about justice and leadership shaped her young mind. But she also studied Egyptian wisdom, the teachings of Ptah-hotep, the maxims of Amenemhotep, East and West, ancient and classical. All knowledge was hers to absorb. Geography lessons took her beyond the palace walls. In her imagination, she traveled the length of the Nile, from the great cataracts in the south to the delta in the north. She learned about Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, two lands united under one crown, the crown that would someday rest on her head. Her teachers described distant kingdoms, Rome growing stronger each year, Parthia in the east, rich with silk and spices, Nubia in the south, abundant with gold and ivory. Each land had its own customs, its own strengths and weaknesses, knowledge that would prove invaluable in years to come. Music and poetry were not neglected. She learned to play the lyre, its strings singing sweet melodies. Her voice was trained in the ancient songs, songs that praised the gods, songs that told of pharaoh's victories, songs that celebrated the flooding of the Nile. Music would become one of her greatest charms, a weapon as powerful as any sword. Physical training kept her body strong. She swam in the palace pools. Cool water embraced her like liquid silk. She learned to ride horses. Their hooves thundered across the sand like distant drums. She practiced archery. Her arrows flew straight and true. A future pharaoh needed strength as well as wisdom. Language study consumed many hours. Greek and Egyptian were not enough. She mastered Latin to speak with Romans, Hebrew and Arabic for trade negotiations, Ethiopian for southern diplomacy. Each new language opened a different world, like keys unlocking secret doors in her mind. The palace children became her first court, brothers and sisters, cousins and companions. They played games of strategy, chess-like contests that mirrored real politics. She learned to read faces as well as scrolls, to understand when someone spoke truth, to recognize the subtle signs of deception. Evening meals were lessons in statecraft. She sat quietly while adults discussed politics, Roman ambitions, Egyptian grain shipments, trade disputes with Greek merchants. Her young ears absorbed every word. Her quick mind filed away each piece of information, building a vast library of knowledge in her memory. Religious instruction was essential for a future pharaoh. She learned the rituals of Isis and Osiris, the ceremonies of Ra and Thoth. Each god had specific prayers and offerings. As pharaoh, she would be the bridge between divine and mortal worlds, the gods' representative on earth. This sacred duty required perfect knowledge of every ritual. Her dreams during this time must have been filled with wonders, flying over Egypt on the wings of Horus, swimming through the underworld with Isis, commanding the sun to rise with Ra. These divine imaginings prepared her young soul for the awesome responsibilities ahead. Can you see her as she was then? A bright child absorbing knowledge like desert sand absorbs rain. Every lesson made her stronger. Every skill would serve her in the challenging years ahead. She was becoming more than a princess. She was becoming Cleopatra. As Cleopatra entered her teenage years, the palace atmosphere grew tense. Political storms gathered like clouds on the horizon. Her father, Ptolemy XII, faced rebellion from his own people. The Egyptians had grown tired of weak rulers. They wanted a pharaoh who truly understood Egypt, not just another Greek puppet. Picture the young Cleopatra walking through halls filled with whispered conversations. Servants spoke in hushed tones. Guards looked worried. The very walls seemed to hold their breath. She was 15 now, old enough to understand that power was a dangerous game, old enough to know that crowns could be lost as easily as won. Roman influence grew stronger each day. Roman merchants filled the markets. Roman soldiers guarded important buildings. Roman gold flowed into Egyptian treasuries. But this help came with a price. Egypt was becoming dependent on Rome's favor, like a beautiful bird in a golden cage. Her father had fled to Rome once before, seeking help. Now he ruled only with Roman support. Cleopatra watched and learned. She saw how foreign power could corrupt, how dependence led to weakness. These lessons burned themselves into her memory. She would remember them when her own time came. The palace buzzed with rumors of war. Some nobles wanted to overthrow Ptolemy XII. Others remained loyal out of fear. Still others waited to see which way the wind would blow. Cleopatra moved through this dangerous maze with growing skill. She learned to smile while keeping her thoughts hidden, to listen more than she spoke, to trust no one completely. Her younger brother Ptolemy XIII was growing into her rival. Ptolemaic tradition demanded that siblings share the throne, brother and sister ruling together as husband and wife. This ancient custom had kept power in the family for centuries, but it also created inevitable conflict. Two people could not truly share supreme power. Can you feel the tension in the palace air? It was thick and heavy, like the stillness before a sandstorm. Servants moved quietly through marble corridors. Their sandals whispered against stone floors. Oil lamps flickered in their holders, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock and threaten. Cleopatra's education took on new urgency now. She studied military tactics, how armies moved across desert terrain, how sieges were conducted, how naval battles were fought. These were not theoretical lessons anymore. They were survival skills she might need very soon. She practiced public speaking in the palace gardens. Her voice carried across lily ponds and flower beds. Royal advisors listened and offered guidance. A pharaoh must inspire loyalty, must command respect, must project strength even when feeling uncertain. The young princess learned to wear confidence like a mask. Religious duties increased as well. She participated in more ceremonies now, standing beside her father as he performed sacred rituals. The people watched her carefully. They wondered if she would be their next queen. Their whispered prayers followed her through temple corridors, like incense seeking the favor of the gods. Her appearance was carefully managed. Royal hairdressers arranged her dark hair in elaborate styles. Cosmetics artists painted her eyes with kohl and malachite. Jewelers adorned her with golden bracelets and necklaces. She was being transformed from princess to queen. Each ornament was a symbol of divine authority. The first real test came when she turned 16. A group of Alexandrian nobles approached her secretly. They offered to support her claim to the throne, against her father, against her brother. They whispered promises of loyalty in moonlit gardens. Their words were honey mixed with poison. Cleopatra listened but made no commitments. She understood this was a trap. Say yes, and she would be branded a traitor. Say no, and she might lose crucial support. Instead, she smiled mysteriously, thanked them for their concern, promised to consider their words. It was her first real diplomatic victory. Her father suspected something but could prove nothing. The dangerous game continued. Each day brought new challenges, new tests of her growing political skills. She walked the razor's edge between loyalty and ambition, between filial duty and personal survival. Meanwhile, Julius Caesar's name echoed through palace halls. This Roman general was conquering Gaul, expanding Rome's empire with every victory. His fame spread like ripples on still water. Cleopatra memorized every detail about him. Someday, she sensed, their paths would cross. Egyptian priests began to take special interest in her. They saw something different in this princess. Unlike her Greek ancestors, she spoke their language. She honored their traditions. She seemed to understand Egypt's soul. Secret ceremonies were conducted on her behalf. Ancient blessings were whispered in sacred precincts. The Nile's annual flood that year was particularly generous. The river rose slowly and steadily. Fertile mud spread across the fields. Farmers sang songs of thanksgiving. Good floods meant good harvests. Good harvests meant happy people. Happy people were easier to rule. Cleopatra stood on the palace balcony watching the floodwaters. The brown river carried life to 1,000,000 acres of farmland. She understood the connection between natural cycles and political power. A wise ruler worked with nature, not against it. This wisdom would serve her well in years to come. As her 17th birthday approached, momentous changes loomed. Her father's health was declining. The succession question could not be delayed much longer. Roman politics were shifting as well. New alliances formed and dissolved like morning mist. The stage was being set for the greatest drama of the ancient world. Can you see her standing there by the Nile, a young woman on the threshold of destiny? The evening breeze stirs her linen gown. Golden jewelry catches the last rays of sunlight. In her dark eyes burns the fire of ambition. Mixed with the wisdom of caution, she is ready for whatever comes next. The death of Ptolemy XII came like a whisper in the night. One moment he was there, weak but breathing. The next moment, he was gone. Cleopatra was 18 years old. The crown of Egypt fell to her like a golden weight, heavy with responsibility, glittering with possibility. Close your eyes and picture the coronation ceremony. The great temple of Ptah in Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital. This was where pharaohs had been crowned for thousands of years. The building was older than memory. Its stones had witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties. Now they would witness the beginning of Cleopatra's reign. Incense burned in golden braziers. The smoke rose in lazy spirals toward painted ceilings. Gods and goddesses looked down from walls covered in hieroglyphs. Their ancient eyes seemed to approve of this new pharaoh, this Greek princess who had learned to love Egypt as her own. The high priest approached carrying the double crown, the red crown of Lower Egypt, the white crown of Upper Egypt. Together, they symbolized the unity of the two lands. When placed on Cleopatra's head, they would make her the living goddess, the incarnation of divine power on earth. Can you hear the chanting of the priests? Their voices rose and fell in ancient rhythms. The same songs had blessed pharaohs since the time of the pyramids, the same words that had crowned Hatshepsut and Nefertiti. Now they crowned another queen, perhaps the greatest of them all. The ceremony lasted from dawn until sunset. Each ritual had meaning, each prayer had power. Sacred oils were poured on her forehead. Holy water from the Nile blessed her lips. Precious jewels were placed around her neck. Each element connected her to Egypt's eternal essence. But even as she accepted the crown, danger lurked nearby. Her brother Ptolemy XIII was only 10 years old, too young to rule alone. But his advisors were not children. They were ambitious men who saw opportunity in a boy king. They whispered poison in his young ears. They told him he deserved the throne, that his sister was an usurper. The first months of Cleopatra's reign were deceptively peaceful. She settled into the rhythms of royal life. Dawn prayers in the palace chapel, morning audiences with petitioners, afternoon meetings with ministers. evening ceremonies honoring the gods. Each day was structured, predictable, soothing in its routine. She modernized the administration with quiet efficiency. New officials were appointed based on merit, not just noble birth. Trade policies were reformed to benefit Egyptian merchants, not just Greek cronies. Tax collection became more fair, more honest. The people began to notice the changes. Her first major decision involved the sacred Apis bull. This living god had died. A new one must be found. The priests searched throughout Egypt for a bull with specific markings: white triangle on forehead, eagle shape on back, double hairs on tail. Only such a bull could house the divine spirit. When the sacred bull was found, Cleopatra personally conducted the installation ceremony. She wore the full regalia of pharaoh, the false beard of kingship, the crook and flail of divine authority. The people saw their queen performing the ancient rituals perfectly. Their loyalty deepened like roots in fertile soil. Romance entered her life through politics. She needed allies against growing Roman power. A marriage to Mark Antony's lieutenant seemed possible. Negotiations began through diplomatic channels. But before anything could be decided, crisis struck from an unexpected direction. Her brother's advisors made their move. They convinced the young Ptolemy XIII that he should rule alone as pharaoh, with his sister as a subordinate queen. The boy, influenced by their flattery, agreed to the plan. Civil war came to Egypt like a plague of locusts. Alexandria erupted in violence. Street fighting raged between supporters of the two siblings. The beautiful city became a battlefield. Marble statues were toppled. Gardens were trampled. The harbor filled with burning ships. Brother fought brother. Sister fought sister. The Ptolemy dynasty turned upon itself. Cleopatra was forced to flee the capital. She gathered her loyal followers in the darkness. Gold and jewels were loaded onto swift ships. Documents and seals of office were secured. As dawn broke over Alexandria, the queen sailed south, toward Upper Egypt, toward the desert, toward an uncertain future. The journey up the Nile was heartbreaking. She passed temples where she had worshipped, cities where she had been acclaimed. Farmers who had blessed her name now looked away in confusion. They had heard she was no longer queen. They feared to show loyalty to a fallen ruler. But Egypt's memory was longer than political convenience. In the ancient temples of Thebes, old priests remembered her kindness, her perfect pronunciation of sacred words, her genuine respect for Egyptian traditions. They offered secret support, hidden sanctuaries, whispered encouragement. She established her court at Thebes temporarily. The ancient capital welcomed her like a mother embracing a wounded daughter. Here, surrounded by monuments to Egypt's greatest pharaohs, she planned her return. Her comeback would be as dramatic as her fall had been sudden. News from the north was troubling. Her brother's advisors were making deals with Rome, promising grain shipments, naval support, military bases. They were selling Egypt's independence piece by piece, like merchants hawking family heirlooms in the marketplace. Cleopatra knew she needed a powerful ally, someone who could match Rome's strength, someone who understood the value of Egypt's friendship. Her keen intelligence identified the perfect candidate: Julius Caesar himself, the most powerful man in the Roman world. But how could an exiled queen meet with Caesar? Her brother controlled Alexandria. Roman troops patrolled the harbor. Any ship carrying Cleopatra would be seized immediately. She needed a plan as bold as it was risky, a plan worthy of a pharaoh. The solution came from an unexpected source. A loyal carpet merchant named Apollodorus offered his services. He had ships, he had connections. Most importantly, he had courage. Together, they devised a scheme that would become legendary. As the sun set over Thebes, Cleopatra prepared for the most important journey of her life. She was 21 years old, beautiful, brilliant, and determined. The crown of Egypt awaited her return. But first, she had to win it back from the most powerful empire in the world. Can you picture her standing on the deck of that small ship? The Nile stretches ahead like a silver ribbon in the moonlight. Desert winds carry the scent of adventure. In her heart burns the fire of ambition. In her mind spins the web of strategy. She is sailing toward her destiny. Picture a moonless night in Alexandria harbor. The water laps gently against stone quays. Roman galleys rock at anchor like sleeping giants. Their bronze rams gleam in the starlight. Guards patrol the docks with measured steps. Their armor clinks softly in the darkness. No one suspects that Egypt's rightful queen is about to make the most dramatic entrance in history. Apollodorus guided his merchant vessel between the Roman ships. His cargo appeared ordinary, carpet and rugs bound for Caesar's quarters, beautiful textiles to please the conquering general. But hidden within the finest carpet lay Egypt's greatest treasure, Cleopatra herself, wrapped in silk and linen, breathing quietly as a prayer. Can you imagine her thoughts during that terrifying journey? Every sound might mean discovery. Every footstep could herald capture. She lay perfectly still in that confined space, her heart beating like a caged bird, her mind focused on the meeting ahead. Everything depended on the next few hours. The carpet bearers carried their precious burden through Alexandria's streets, past her own palace where her brother now held court, past temples where she had once worshipped as queen. The irony was bitter as honey mixed with myrrh. She was returning home as hidden cargo, like a smuggled jewel in a merchant's bag. Caesar's temporary residence overlooked the harbor. Roman efficiency had transformed an Egyptian villa into a military headquarters. Maps covered the walls. Scrolls filled with reports cluttered every table. The sound of marching feet echoed from the courtyard. This was the nerve center of Roman power in Egypt. The great general himself was studying dispatches when the carpet merchants arrived. He was 52 years old. His hair was thinning, but his eyes remained sharp as a hawk's. Victory in Gaul had made him rich and famous, but political enemies in Rome made him dangerous and desperate. He needed Egypt's gold to fund his ambitions. Apollodorus bowed low before the Roman commander. His voice was steady despite the enormous risk. He had brought the finest carpets in Alexandria, gifts worthy of Caesar's greatness. Would the general honor him by examining the merchandise personally? Caesar, intrigued by the merchant's eloquence, agreed to look. The carpet was unrolled slowly. Servants pulled at its edges while Apollodorus narrated its virtues. The patterns were exquisite. The colors were vibrant. The workmanship was perfect. And then, as the final fold fell away, Cleopatra emerged like Venus rising from the sea foam. She stood gracefully despite her cramped journey. Her dark hair cascaded over bare shoulders. Her eyes flashed with intelligence and determination. She wore a simple but elegant chiton that clung to her figure. Golden jewelry caught the lamplight and scattered it like captured stars. She was 21 years old and absolutely magnificent. Caesar's surprise lasted only a moment. This was a man who had conquered Gaul, and crossed the Rubicon. He had seen everything the world had to offer, but never had he seen anything quite like Cleopatra. Her beauty was obvious, but her courage in coming to him this way spoke of something more: intelligence, audacity, the qualities he admired most. She spoke first, her voice melodious as a lyre. In perfect Latin, she greeted the great Caesar. She acknowledged his victories, praised his wisdom, asked for his protection against those who would steal her rightful throne. Every word was carefully chosen, every gesture perfectly calculated. She was performing the role of her lifetime. Caesar gestured for wine to be brought, for cushions to be arranged. The dramatic entrance had earned her an audience. Now she must win his support through wit and charm. The fate of Egypt hung in the balance. Her own life depended on her ability to enchant this most powerful of Romans. They talked through the night, about politics and poetry, about strategy and philosophy, about the nature of power and the responsibilities of rulers. Caesar found himself fascinated by this young queen who could quote Plato in Greek and Cicero in Latin, who understood Egyptian theology and Roman law with equal facility. Cleopatra painted a picture of Egypt's value to Rome, not as a conquered province but as a willing ally. Her kingdom could provide grain for Roman legions, gold for Roman treasuries, ships for Roman navies, but only if she ruled, only if Egypt remained autonomous under her crown. She spoke of her brother's incompetence, his advisors' corruption, their willingness to sell Egypt piece by piece. Under their rule, the kingdom would become a hollow shell, a burden rather than an asset. Rome would gain a province but lose an empire's most valuable partner. As dawn approached, Caesar found himself convinced, not just by her arguments, though they were compelling, not just by her beauty, though it was extraordinary, but by something deeper, a recognition of kindred ambition, of shared vision, of mutual need in a dangerous world. The agreement they reached would reshape the ancient world. Caesar would restore Cleopatra to her throne. She would provide Egypt's resources to his cause. Together, they would forge an alliance between East and West, between Roman power and Egyptian wealth, between masculine force and feminine wisdom. But first, the immediate crisis had to be resolved. Ptolemy XIII and his advisors controlled most of Alexandria. They had the support of many nobles and priests. Removing them would require careful planning, precise execution, the kind of political surgery that Caesar had perfected in his years of war and diplomacy. The next few days unfolded like moves in a chess game. Caesar summoned both siblings to meet with him, ostensibly to mediate their dispute. Ptolemy XIII arrived with confidence, expecting Roman support. His surprise at seeing his sister there was quickly replaced by anger, then by fear as he realized the game had changed. Caesar's judgment was swift and decisive. The will of Ptolemy XII had named both children as joint rulers. Roman law supported the validity of such testaments. Therefore, both siblings would rule together as husband and wife, following Ptolemaic tradition. Case closed, discussion ended. But Ptolemy XIII's advisors were not finished. They had invested too much in their puppet king to surrender easily. Secret meetings were held, bribes were offered, messages were sent to Roman senators who opposed Caesar. The situation remained dangerous despite the public reconciliation. Cleopatra moved back into the palace cautiously. Every shadow might hide an assassin. Every smile might mask betrayal. She surrounded herself with loyal guards, tasted every meal carefully, trusted no one completely except Caesar himself. The carpet entrance had been bold. Survival would require equal cunning. The young queen began to consolidate her power methodically. Key positions were filled with her supporters. The treasury was secured. Grain shipments to Caesar's legions resumed. Slowly but surely, she transformed her dramatic comeback into lasting control. Her relationship with Caesar deepened beyond mere politics. He was older, experienced, worldly. She was young, brilliant, exotic. The attraction between them was mutual and powerful. Love and ambition intertwined like golden threads in a royal tapestry. By winter's end, Cleopatra was secure on her throne. Her brother remained as co-ruler in name only. His advisors had been exiled or executed. The threat to her reign had passed, but larger challenges loomed on the horizon. Caesar's enemies in Rome would not ignore his Egyptian alliance forever. Can you see her standing on the palace balcony? The same one where she had watched the Nile's flood as a teenager. Now she was queen in her own right, beloved by her people, allied with Rome's greatest general. The carpet gambit had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, but this was only the beginning of her extraordinary story. Spring came to Egypt like a gentle blessing. The Nile had receded, leaving behind rich black soil. Farmers planted their crops under warm sunshine. Date palms swayed in soft breezes. The kingdom breathed peacefully under Cleopatra's restored rule. And in the royal palace, love bloomed like lotus flowers on still water. Caesar found himself enchanted by more than Cleopatra's political acumen. She was 22 now, in the full flower of her beauty. Her laughter was music that echoed through marble halls. Her intelligence sparkled brighter than the jewels she wore. Her company became the brightest part of his days. Picture them walking together through the palace gardens. Fountain spray catches rainbow light in the afternoon sun. The scent of jasmine and roses perfumes the air. Caesar, the conqueror of Gaul, walks beside Egypt's queen like a love-struck youth. Power has not dimmed his capacity for wonder. Age has not cooled his ability to feel passion. Cleopatra planned a journey that would show Caesar the true glory of Egypt, not just Alexandria with its Greek influences and Roman presence, but the eternal Egypt of the pharaohs, the land of mysteries and miracles that had existed since the dawn of civilization. She would take him up the Nile to see wonders that would make even Caesar marvel. The royal barge was prepared with exquisite care. It was 300 feet long and 40 feet wide, a floating palace worthy of Egypt's queen. The cabin was panelled with cedar and decorated with gold. Silken awnings provided shade while allowing cooling breezes to flow. Every detail spoke of luxury and refinement. The crew numbered in the hundreds, rowers to propel the great vessel against the current, musicians to provide entertainment, chefs to prepare exotic delicacies, servants to attend every need, guards to ensure safety. It was less a ship than a mobile city dedicated to pleasure and magnificence. Can you hear the splash of oars as they began their journey? The rhythm was hypnotic, like a giant heartbeat. The Nile stretched ahead of them, brown and eternal. Villages lined the banks, their children waving at the royal procession. Farmers paused in their work to bow as the barge passed. Egypt was greeting its queen and her distinguished guest. The first stop was Memphis, the ancient capital. Here stood the Great Pyramid of Giza, already 2,000 years old when Cleopatra was born. Caesar, who had seen the wonders of Athens and Rome, stood speechless before this monument to human ambition. It was larger than anything in the Roman world. more mysterious than the temples of Jupiter. They climbed inside the pyramid together. Oil lamps flickered in narrow corridors. Their footsteps echoed in chambers built for eternity. The air was cool and still, as if time itself had stopped. Cleopatra told Caesar about the pharaoh buried here, about the beliefs that created such monuments, about the Egyptian view of death as merely another journey. In the evening they dined on the barge's deck. The pyramid loomed against stars like a mountain crafted by gods. Caesar had never experienced anything like this mixture of beauty and power. Cleopatra had orchestrated every moment to maximum effect. She was not just entertaining her lover, she was educating her ally, showing him what Rome gained by friendship with Egypt. The journey continued southward for days that melted into weeks. Each bend in the river revealed new wonders. Temples carved from living rock, statues taller than trees, paintings that seemed to glow with inner light. Caesar began to understand why Egypt had captivated every conqueror who entered its borders. At Thebes, they visited the great temple of Karnak. Its columns were larger than Roman buildings. Its halls could hold thousands of worshippers. Priests conducted ceremonies that were ancient when Rome was just a cluster of mud huts. The weight of history was almost tangible in the incense-heavy air. Cleopatra led Caesar into the Holy of Holies, the most sacred chamber where only pharaohs were permitted. Here she performed rituals that connected her to every ruler in Egypt's long line. Caesar watched in fascination as his lover became something more than human. She transformed before his eyes into the living embodiment of divine power. Their nights were spent in intimate conversation under Egyptian stars. The desert sky was deeper and clearer than any Caesar had seen. Constellations told stories older than Homer. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like the Nile's celestial twin. In this primordial setting, their love deepened beyond mere attraction. They talked about their dreams for the future. Caesar shared his vision of a Roman Empire that stretched from Britain to Persia. Cleopatra spoke of an Egypt that would be Rome's equal partner, not its subordinate. Together they imagined a golden age when East and West would unite under their combined rule. Physical intimacy grew naturally from intellectual communion. Their love was passionate but also tender. Caesar had known many women, but none like Cleopatra. She was his equal in ambition, his superior in learning, his match in political cunning. She challenged him as no one ever had. For Cleopatra, Caesar represented everything she needed: protection from Roman hostility, resources for Egyptian development, a pathway to greater power and influence. But beyond these practical considerations lay genuine affection. She admired his courage, respected his intelligence, enjoyed his wit and worldliness. News from Alexandria interrupted their idyllic journey. Ptolemy XIII's remaining supporters had rebelled again. They controlled parts of the city and threatened the palace. Caesar's lieutenant Rufio was holding the harbour, but the situation was precarious. The lovers' peaceful voyage had to end. Caesar transformed instantly from tourist to general. Orders flowed from his lips like water from a spring. Messages were dispatched to Roman garrisons. Ships were commandeered for rapid transport. The return to Alexandria would be swift and decisive. The honeymoon was over. War had returned. But something wonderful had been conceived during those magical weeks on the Nile. Not just a political alliance, though that was stronger than ever. Not just a romantic bond, though that would endure many trials. Something more precious and dangerous than either. Cleopatra was carrying Caesar's child. She told him as they approached Alexandria's harbor. The great lighthouse guided their ship home, its beacon cutting through morning mist. Caesar's joy was immediate and profound. At 53, he had no legitimate son. This child could be his heir, the bridge between Roman power and Egyptian glory. The rebellion was crushed within days of their return. Caesar's veterans were too experienced, too disciplined for amateur revolutionaries. Ptolemy XIII died in the fighting, whether by accident or design, history does not record. Some whispered that Cleopatra ordered his death. Others blamed Caesar's soldiers. The truth died with him in Alexandria's blood-soaked streets. With her brother's death, Cleopatra became sole ruler of Egypt. The fiction of joint monarchy ended. She was pharaoh in fact as well as name. The crown that had been shared was now hers alone. At 23, she commanded one of the world's greatest kingdoms, and she carried the child of its most powerful protector. The pregnancy progressed peacefully through the hot summer months. Palace physicians attended her with gentle care. The best foods were prepared for her table, cool fountains played in her chambers. Everything possible was done to ensure the health of mother and child. This baby represented the future of both Rome and Egypt. Caesar remained in Alexandria longer than military necessity required. His enemies in Rome grew suspicious of his extended absence. Why was the great general lingering in Egypt when Gaul required attention? What hold did this foreign queen have over Roman ambitions? Dangerous questions were being asked in the forum. But Caesar seemed unconcerned by Roman gossip. He was building something unprecedented, an empire that bridged continents, a dynasty that combined bloodlines. His son would inherit Caesar's Roman strength and Cleopatra's Egyptian wisdom. The child would be living proof of East-West unity. Birth came in the cool season when Nile floods had receded. Labor pains began as dawn painted the eastern sky. Palace midwives attended the queen while priests offered prayers for safe delivery. Incense burned in every temple throughout Egypt. The kingdom held its breath, waiting for news. The baby arrived as the sun reached its zenith, a son, healthy and strong-voiced. His first cries echoed through marble halls like pronouncements of destiny. Cleopatra held him against her heart, while tears of joy streamed down her face. Caesar stood beside the bed, overwhelmed by the miracle he had helped create. They named him Caesarion, Little Caesar, the boy who would carry both bloodlines into an uncertain future. Roman citizens by his father's name, Egyptian royalty through his mother's crown. He was the living symbol of their hopes and dreams, the embodiment of their grand alliance. Caesar's departure became inevitable as winter approached. His enemies were moving against him in Rome. Mark Antony sent urgent messages demanding his return. The political situation was deteriorating rapidly. Every day of delay weakened his position and strengthened his rivals. The farewell was heartbreaking. Caesar held his infant son while Cleopatra clung to his arm. They had created something beautiful together, a love that transcended politics, a child who represented their shared future. Now that future hung in the balance of Roman civil war. Promises were made in whispered voices. Caesar would return as soon as possible. Cleopatra would keep Egypt loyal to his cause. Their son would be raised knowing his heritage from both parents. The alliance between Rome and Egypt would survive any temporary separation. Ships waited in the harbor, their sails billowing in morning wind. Roman soldiers marched aboard in perfect formation. Officers shouted commands that echoed across the water. The machinery of war was in motion. Caesar the lover was becoming Caesar the conqueror once again. Cleopatra stood on the palace balcony, holding Caesarion as the fleet sailed away. The white sails grew smaller and smaller until they vanished beyond the horizon. She had gambled everything on this relationship. Now she could only wait and pray that fortune would smile on their bold enterprise. The Queen of Egypt was alone again, but not truly alone. She had her son, she had her kingdom, she had memories of weeks that had been perfect as pearls, and she had faith that love and intelligence could triumph over any obstacle, even the chaotic politics of Republican Rome. Can you picture her there with her baby? The Mediterranean breeze stirring her hair, Caesarion sleeping peacefully in her arms, the future stretching ahead like an unwritten scroll, full of possibilities, shadowed by dangers, but bright with the hope that their love story was just beginning. Winter in Alexandria was gentle compared to Rome's harsh cold. Palm trees swayed in warm breezes while snow fell on distant Italian hills. Cleopatra spent peaceful hours with baby Caesarion, watching him grow stronger each day. His dark eyes were alert and intelligent. His tiny hands grasped everything within reach. Already he seemed to understand his special destiny. Messages from Rome arrived with every ship. Caesar's letters were loving but increasingly urgent. The political situation was deteriorating faster than expected. His enemies were forming coalitions. Accusations of tyranny followed him like shadows. The Roman Republic was tearing itself apart with suspicion and ambition. Cleopatra read between the lines of his careful words. Caesar was in danger. Real danger from men who feared his power and resented his success. The same jealousy that had always plagued great leaders now threatened the man she loved. The father of her child was walking into a trap he might not escape. She considered sailing to Rome herself. Her presence might tip the balance in Caesar's favor. Egyptian gold could buy Roman loyalties. Her diplomatic skills could smooth ruffled feathers. But the risks were enormous. Rome was hostile territory for foreign queens. Her arrival might inflame rather than calm the situation. Instead, she sent gifts, treasures that demonstrated Egypt's friendship without seeming like bribes, rare spices for Roman tables, fine linen for Roman beds, exotic animals for Roman games. Each present carried a subtle message. Egypt remained Caesar's loyal ally. Its resources were at his disposal. The palace routine continued despite her growing anxiety. Morning audiences heard petitioners' requests. Afternoon councils planned administrative reforms. Evening ceremonies honored the gods with traditional prayers. But her heart was across the Mediterranean with the man who had captured it so completely. Caesarion provided constant joy amid mounting worries. He was growing rapidly, his baby features becoming more defined. Sometimes Cleopatra saw Caesar's profile in their son's face. Other times she recognized her own expressions. The child was a perfect blend of both parents, just as they had dreamed. She established a school within the palace for Caesarion's future education. The best tutors in Alexandria were recruited. Greek philosophers, Egyptian priests, Roman historians. Her son would learn all languages and understand all cultures. He would be prepared for the cosmopolitan world they were creating. News from Rome grew more ominous as spring approached. Caesar had been declared dictator for life. His enemies called this the death of the Republic. Secret meetings were held in private villas. Whispered conspiracies spread through the city like plague. The name Brutus was mentioned with increasing frequency. Cleopatra's spies reported everything they could discover. A network of merchants, sailors, and diplomats kept her informed, but distance made accurate intelligence difficult. By the time news reached Alexandria, events in Rome had already moved beyond prediction or control. The first hint of disaster came with the arrival of a merchant ship. Its captain brought terrible rumors from Roman ports. Caesar was dead, murdered by senators, killed in the theatre of Pompey on the Ides of March. But rumors were often false. Cleopatra refused to believe until confirmation arrived. The official messenger reached Alexandria 3 days later. His face was grave as he requested immediate audience with the queen. The scroll he carried bore the seal of Mark Antony. His words were formal, but the message was devastating. Julius Caesar was dead, assassinated by men he had trusted. The Roman world was in chaos. Cleopatra's composure never wavered in public. She received the news with royal dignity, asked appropriate questions, dismissed the messenger with proper courtesy. But once alone in her chambers, grief overwhelmed her like a flooding river. The man she had loved was gone forever. She held Caesarion close as tears streamed down her face. Her son was now fatherless. Her kingdom was now unprotected. Her grand alliance was now shattered. Everything they had built together lay in ruins. The future that had seemed so bright was suddenly dark as a moonless night. But Cleopatra was pharaoh as well as grieving lover. Personal sorrow could not paralyze royal duty. Egypt needed leadership more than ever. The kingdom's survival depended on swift, intelligent action. She forced her emotions into a locked chamber of her heart and began to plan. The assassins claimed they had saved the Republic, but their deed had actually destroyed it. Rome would tear itself apart in civil war. Different factions would battle for Caesar's legacy. Smart money and careful diplomacy could still secure Egypt's interests. If played correctly, this crisis might become opportunity. Mark Antony was Caesar's lieutenant and closest friend. He had survived the assassination and was gathering forces. But Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, was also claiming leadership. The boy was young, but dangerous. His name carried Caesar's prestige. His inheritance included Caesar's wealth and veterans' loyalty. Cleopatra studied both men carefully. Antony was experienced, charismatic, and familiar with Eastern politics. Octavian was untested, but ruthless. With the legal advantage of adoption, either might become Caesar's true successor. Her choice between them would determine Egypt's fate. For now, she adopted a policy of watchful neutrality. Egyptian ports remained open to all Romans. Grain shipments continued to whoever could pay. No military commitments were made to either side. She would wait and observe before picking the winning horse. The palace became a fortress of intelligence gathering. Every Roman visitor was questioned politely. Every letter was read carefully. Every rumor was analyzed thoroughly. Cleopatra needed to understand the changing balance of power before committing Egypt's future to any faction. Caesarion became her source of hope during these dark months. His laughter echoed through halls that mourned his father. His growth represented continuity despite chaos. His very existence proved that something beautiful had emerged from the wreckage of their dreams. She began teaching him about his heritage early, stories of great pharaohs and noble Romans, tales of gods and heroes from both cultures. The child absorbed these lessons like desert sand absorbs rain. His education would prepare him for leadership in a complicated world. Letters arrived from both Antony and Octavian. Each courted Egypt's friendship with promises and threats. Antony offered partnership and protection. Octavian demanded submission and tribute. The contrast revealed their different characters and likely policies. Cleopatra's decision was made gradually. Antony seemed more compatible with Egyptian independence. His policies favored eastern provinces over Italian interests. His personality was more flexible than Octavian's rigid ideology. Most importantly, he needed Egypt more than Egypt needed him. But she would not reveal her choice too quickly. Let both Romans compete for her favor. Let them offer better terms as their desperation increased. Egypt held valuable cards in this deadly game. She would play them with all the skill her education had provided. As the anniversary of Caesar's death approached, Cleopatra made a pilgrimage to the temple of Isis. There she prayed for guidance and strength. The goddess had protected Egypt since the beginning of time. Surely she would not abandon her chosen pharaoh in this hour of trial. The priest's prophecy was cryptic but encouraging. Egypt's crown would remain secure. Her bloodline would endure. Love would return to heal her wounded heart. The future held both triumph and tragedy, but the kingdom would survive all storms through the wisdom of its queen. Can you see her kneeling before the sacred altar? Incense surrounds her like golden clouds. Divine statues seem to move in the flickering lamplight. Her prayers rise toward heaven like the smoke of sacrifice. She is asking for the strength to lead her people through the darkness ahead. 2 years had passed since Caesar's assassination. Rome was consumed by civil war. Armies marched across Italy like hungry wolves. Cities changed hands with every season. The republic that Brutus had tried to save was dying in its own blood. And in Egypt, Cleopatra watched and waited for the right moment to act. The moment came with a summons that could not be ignored. Mark Antony, now master of Rome's eastern provinces, demanded her presence. He was holding court in Tarsus, a wealthy city in Asia Minor. His message was polite but firm. The Queen of Egypt would attend him to discuss mutual interests. Failure to appear might be considered unfriendly. Cleopatra understood the game being played. Antony needed to demonstrate his authority over client kingdoms. She needed to secure Egypt's position with Rome's new strongman. But she would not come as a supplicant begging favors. She would arrive as an equal seeking partnership. The meeting would be theater, and she intended to steal the show. Picture the preparations that consumed weeks of careful planning. The royal barge was refurbished with even greater splendor than before. New awnings of purple silk replaced the old. Golden decorations were added to every surface. The vessel became a floating palace that would shame anything in the Roman fleet. Her costume required equal attention. This first impression would determine everything that followed. She chose to appear as Isis Aphrodite, the love goddess revered throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. The symbolism was perfect. Beauty and divinity combined. Power expressed through attraction rather than force. The dress was gossamer silk that seemed woven from moonbeams. It clung to her figure while flowing like water around her movements. Golden jewelry caught sunlight and scattered it in dazzling patterns. Her hair was arranged in elaborate coils secured with precious pins. Every detail proclaimed her divine nature. Can you smell the perfumes that surrounded her like an invisible cloud? Roses and jasmine from her private gardens, frankincense and myrrh from distant Nubia, sandalwood and cinnamon from mysterious India. The very air around her became intoxicating, a sensory proclamation of wealth and sophistication. The journey from Alexandria to Tarsus took 10 days through calm seas. Cleopatra used the time to study everything known about Mark Antony. His military record was impressive, his political skills were considerable, but his personal weaknesses were equally famous. Wine, women, and luxury could make him vulnerable to the right approach. He was Caesar's age when they had met, 42 years old and at the height of his powers, handsome in a rugged way that appealed to soldiers and citizens alike, generous to friends, ruthless to enemies, a man of enormous appetites who took what he wanted without apology or shame. The Cydnus River carried her barge toward Tarsus like a golden arrow aimed at destiny. Word of her approach spread through the city faster than fire. Crowds gathered along the riverbank to witness this legendary queen's arrival. Even Romans paused in their business to stare at the approaching wonder. The scene that greeted their eyes defied description. The royal barge moved upstream against the current like a vision from mythology. Purple sails billowed in a following wind that seemed to blow for her alone. Golden oars flashed in perfect rhythm. The vessel itself appeared to fly above the water rather than sail upon it. Musicians filled the air with haunting melodies. Flutes and lyres created harmonies that seemed to call the very fish from the depths. The music was neither Greek nor Roman nor Egyptian. It was something altogether new, a sound that spoke of empire that spanned continents and cultures. Cleopatra reclined on a golden couch placed amidships. Her position allowed everyone to see her clearly while she remained elevated above common mortals. Young boys dressed as cupids fanned her with peacock feathers. Beautiful girls posed as sea nymphs around her feet. The tableau was calculated to overwhelm the senses. Antony had been holding court in the city's main square when news of her arrival reached him. He was dispensing justice to local petitioners, demonstrating Roman authority through public ceremonies. But as reports of Cleopatra's approach multiplied, his audience began to slip away. Curiosity drew them toward the river like metal to a magnet. Soon the Roman general found himself alone, except for his closest advisors. The entire population of Tarsus had gone to see the Egyptian queen. Even his own soldiers were abandoning their posts for glimpses of this legendary beauty. The situation was embarrassing, but also amusing. She had upstaged him before they even met. The barge docked at the main quay as sunset painted the sky in royal colours. Torches were lit along the waterfront, their flames reflecting on the dark water like fallen stars. The crowd pressed close but maintained respectful distance. They sensed they were witnessing history in the making. Cleopatra did not disembark immediately. She waited on her floating throne while servants prepared the gangplank. The delay was deliberate, building anticipation like a master storyteller pausing before the climax. Every eye was fixed on her radiant figure. Every breath was held in expectation. When she finally rose and walked toward shore, the crowd released a collective sigh of wonder. She moved with fluid grace that made her seem to float rather than walk. The silk dress flowed around her like liquid gold. Her jewelry caught torchlight and threw it back in brilliant flashes. She was every inch the goddess she pretended to be. Antony met her at the quay's edge with a formal escort of Roman officers. He wore his best armor, polished to mirror brightness. A scarlet cloak proclaimed his rank and authority. But beside Cleopatra's ethereal magnificence, he looked solid and earthbound, mortal where she was divine. Their eyes met for the first time as she stepped onto Roman territory. His were blue-grey, frank and appraising. Hers were dark brown, mysterious and knowing. The spark that passed between them was visible to every observer, chemistry ignited like oil touched by flame. Another legendary romance was about to begin. The formal greetings were brief and courteous. Antony welcomed Egypt's queen to his domain. Cleopatra expressed gratitude for his hospitality. But beneath the diplomatic words, deeper currents were already flowing. Attraction and calculation intertwined like golden threads in a royal tapestry. She had come to secure Egypt's future through Roman protection. He needed Egyptian wealth to fund his ambitious plans. But as they looked into each other's eyes beside the torchlit river, practical concerns faded into background. Something much more personal and powerful was taking shape between these two extraordinary people. The crowds began to disperse as night settled over Tarsus. But the story of Cleopatra's arrival would be told and retold for generations. How she came to Antony not as a subject, but as a goddess. How she conquered the conqueror without drawing a sword. How love once again mixed with politics in the dangerous game of empire. Can you see them standing there beside the dark water? Two of the most powerful people in the ancient world, drawn together by mutual need and growing attraction. The torches cast dancing shadows on their faces. The river murmurs its eternal song. History holds its breath to see what will happen next. The banquet Cleopatra hosted that first night in Tarsus became legendary throughout the ancient world. She had invited Antony aboard her magnificent barge, transforming it into a floating palace of impossible luxury. Every surface gleamed with gold and precious stones. The air was heavy with the scent of exotic flowers and burning incense. Picture yourself reclining on silk cushions as dishes of unimaginable delicacy appeared before you. Peacocks roasted in their own plumage, oysters from distant Britannia, honeyed wine from the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. Each course was more elaborate than the last. Each flavor was perfectly balanced to please the most sophisticated palate. Musicians played throughout the meal, their melodies weaving spells of enchantment. Dancers moved between the tables like living statues, animated by divine breath. The entertainment was subtle but overwhelming. Beauty surrounded the diners like a golden mist that clouded judgment and inflamed desire. Antony, accustomed to Roman banquets, had never experienced anything comparable. The scale of luxury was beyond even his considerable imagination. More importantly, he had never met a woman who could match him in intelligence, wit, and sheer force of personality. Cleopatra was unlike anyone in his extensive experience. She spoke fluent Latin with barely a trace of accent. Her knowledge of Roman history impressed him with its depth and accuracy. But she also shared stories of Egypt that opened vistas of ancient wisdom. Her conversations sparkled with humor while revealing depths of learning that rivaled any philosopher's. As the evening progressed, political discussion gave way to more personal topics. Antony found himself telling her about his campaigns, his victories, his dreams for the future. She listened with flattering attention, asking intelligent questions that showed genuine interest. For a man accustomed to sycophantic audiences, her sincere engagement was intoxicating. The banquet lasted until dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold. Neither wanted the magical evening to end. They had discovered something rare and precious, a meeting of equals in intelligence and ambition, a partnership that could reshape the balance of power throughout the known world. Antony accepted Cleopatra's invitation to visit Alexandria. His official duties in Tarsus could wait. Egypt's wealth and Egypt's queen offered opportunities too valuable to ignore. The journey south became a pleasure cruise that strengthened their growing bond with every passing hour. Alexandria welcomed them with celebrations that lasted for weeks. The entire city participated in festivals honoring the visiting Roman and their beloved queen. Streets were decorated with flowers and silk banners. Fountains flowed with wine instead of water. Every night brought new entertainments in the palace's magnificent halls. Cleopatra introduced Antony to the intellectual life of her capital. They visited the famous library together, wandering through corridors lined with countless scrolls. Scholars explained their research, while poets recited new verses. The accumulated knowledge of centuries surrounded them like invisible treasure more valuable than gold. The museum, Alexandria's center of learning, became their frequent destination. Here, the greatest minds of the age pursued studies that expanded human understanding. Mathematicians calculated the Earth's circumference, astronomers mapped the movements of planets, physicians dissected cadavers to understand anatomy. Antony was impressed despite himself by Egypt's commitment to learning. Religious ceremonies revealed another side of Cleopatra's nature. As pharaoh, she was high priestess of Egypt's ancient faith. Antony watched in fascination as she performed rituals older than Rome itself. Her transformation from witty companion to divine incarnation was complete and compelling. She was literally goddess-made flesh. Their relationship deepened through shared experiences and mutual respect. Antony had known many women, but none who could challenge him intellectually while satisfying him emotionally. Cleopatra had loved Caesar, but he had been old enough to be her father. Antony was closer to her age and more compatible with her passionate nature. Physical attraction ignited easily between these two vibrant people. Both were beautiful, both were powerful, both were accustomed to taking what they desired. Their love was passionate but also practical. Each needed what the other offered. Personal pleasure and political advantage merged into one overwhelming force. The announcement of their alliance sent shockwaves throughout the Roman world. Octavian, Antony's rival, used the news for propaganda purposes. He painted Antony as corrupted by Eastern luxury, seduced by foreign witchcraft, weakened by barbarian influences. The attack was effective among traditional Romans who distrusted anything non-Italian. But in the eastern provinces, reaction was generally positive. Greek cities remembered Alexander's marriage to Persian royalty. They understood that great empires required cultural fusion. Roman strength combined with Egyptian wisdom could create something unprecedented in human history, a truly cosmopolitan civilization. Antony established his headquarters in Alexandria, governing half the Roman world from Cleopatra's palace. His offices occupied entire wings of the vast complex. Roman efficiency merged with Egyptian magnificence to create an administrative machine of impressive capability. East and West were literally united under one roof. Their first child was born as winter gave way to spring. Twins, a boy and a girl, arrived within hours of each other. The births were seen as omens of divine favor. Cleopatra had given Antony something Caesar had never achieved: legitimate heirs to carry on his bloodline and his legacy. The twins were named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Sun and moon, brother and sister, representing the cosmic balance that their parents hoped to achieve in the mortal world. Their very names proclaimed the grand ambitions of their extraordinary parents. Caesarion, now 6 years old, accepted his new siblings with good-natured curiosity. His mother explained that they were his brother and sister, children of another great Roman general. The boy seemed to understand instinctively that his family was unusual but special. Multiple fathers were apparently normal in royal households. Antony proved to be an affectionate father despite his many responsibilities. He played with the children when duties permitted, telling them stories of his military adventures. The palace echoed with laughter as the great general got down on his hands and knees to give horseback rides to his offspring. A third child followed 2 years later. Another son named Ptolemy Philadelphus after one of Cleopatra's royal ancestors. This boy completed their family, giving them 4 children representing the union of Egyptian and Roman bloodlines. The dynasty they were creating seemed blessed by all the gods. These were golden years for both lovers. Their kingdoms prospered under joint administration. Trade flowed freely between East and West. Cultural exchange enriched both civilizations. Artists and scholars moved easily between Alexandria and Rome, carrying ideas that fertilized creative genius wherever they settled. But clouds were gathering on the western horizon. Octavian had consolidated his power in Italy, while Antony enjoyed Egyptian pleasures. The young Caesar's heir was methodically building alliances, accumulating wealth, training legions. He presented himself as Rome's defender against Eastern corruption. The propaganda war was becoming prelude to actual conflict. Cleopatra urged Antony to take the threat seriously. Her spies brought disturbing reports from Rome. Octavian was planning something dramatic, perhaps even open war against his former colleague. The triumvirate that had divided the Roman world was breaking apart like a ship in a storm. But for now, love and luxury cushioned them from harsh realities. Alexandria remained a paradise where anything seemed possible, where 2 extraordinary people had created something beautiful together, where the future stretched ahead like an infinite scroll waiting to be written with golden ink. Can you see them on the palace terrace as evening settles over their city? Antony's arm around Cleopatra's waist, their children playing at their feet, the harbour spread before them like a jeweled carpet. They have everything mortals could desire, but destiny is preparing challenges that will test even their remarkable partnership. The great ceremony began at dawn with the sound of silver trumpets echoing across Alexandria's harbour. Ships from every corner of the Mediterranean had come to witness this unprecedented spectacle. Merchants, diplomats, scholars, and curiosity seekers crowded the city's streets. Everyone sensed they were about to see history made. Close your eyes and picture the grand amphitheatre filled to capacity. 30,000 people sat in tiered rows of marble seats. Silk banners in purple and gold fluttered from every column. The morning sun cast dramatic shadows across the arena, where 2 golden thrones had been placed on a raised platform. Antony entered first, wearing the regalia of a Roman triumphator. His purple cloak was heavy with golden embroidery. The laurel crown on his head gleamed like captured sunlight. He walked with the confident stride of a man who had conquered nations. But today he would proclaim conquests of a different kind. Cleopatra followed, and the crowd's gasp was audible even in the highest seats. She wore the full costume of Isis, goddess of Egypt and the civilized world. Her gown seemed woven from liquid starlight. The sacred Uraeus serpent crowned her brow. Wings of gold and lapis lazuli spread from her shoulders. She was divinity made visible. Their children accompanied them in smaller versions of royal costume. Caesarion, now 13, walked with the dignity of a prince conscious of his heritage. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, held hands as they climbed the steps to the platform. Little Ptolemy Philadelphus, barely able to walk, was carried by his nurse. Can you hear the silence that fell over the amphitheater as Antony began to speak? His voice, trained by years of addressing troops and crowds, carried clearly to every corner of the vast space. He spoke in Greek so all could understand, but his words would reshape the Roman world. He began by recounting his recent victories. Armenia had fallen to Roman arms. Parthia had been humbled. The eastern frontier was secure from the Euphrates to the Caucasus. These were real achievements that even his enemies in Rome could not deny. The foundation for what followed was solid military success. But then came the stunning announcements. He was donating these conquered territories not to Rome, but to his beloved Cleopatra and their children. Egypt's borders would expand to include vast new provinces. The Ptolemaic kingdom would stretch from Libya to the Caspian Sea. An empire to rival Rome itself was being born. Caesarion was proclaimed King of Kings, heir to all the lands being granted. The title echoed Persian and Parthian usage, deliberately snubbing Roman republican traditions. This boy, Caesar's son by an Egyptian queen, was being positioned as ruler of the East. The implications were revolutionary and dangerous. Alexander Helios received Armenia, Media, and Parthia as his inheritance. Though only 6 years old, he was crowned with the royal tiara of the Parthian kings. His future empire would stretch to the borders of India. The sun god's earthly representative would rule where the sun rose each morning. Cleopatra Selene was granted Cyrenaica and Libya, making her queen of North Africa's breadbasket. The moon goddess would govern the lands where grain grew to feed the Mediterranean world. Even as a small girl, she bore responsibility for millions of lives and vast agricultural wealth. Little Ptolemy Philadelphus received Syria and Cilicia, the bridges between Asia and Europe. These were the richest commercial provinces in the world, where trade routes converged and fortunes were made. The youngest child would control the flow of goods that sustained ancient civilization. Cleopatra herself was confirmed as Queen of Egypt and Cyprus, but her titles expanded dramatically. She was declared Queen of Kings, superior even to her son Caesarion. The traditional Ptolemaic claim to rule the entire eastern Mediterranean was being revived with Roman military backing. The ceremony continued for hours as each grant was formally proclaimed and recorded. Scribes wrote frantically to preserve every word for posterity. Artists sketched the scene for reproduction on coins and monuments. This was theatre on the grandest possible scale, designed to awe the ancient world. But the most dramatic moment came when Antony knelt before Cleopatra's throne. This Roman general, descendant of Hercules, victor over Armenia and Parthia, bowed his head before an Egyptian queen. The symbolism was unmistakable. East had conquered West through love rather than war. The crowd's reaction was electric. Some cheered wildly at the spectacle. Others sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. A few wept openly, sensing that they had seen the end of one age and the beginning of another. The Roman Republic was being transformed before their eyes. News of the donation spread across the Mediterranean like wildfire. Every port city buzzed with excited discussion. Merchants calculated the implications for trade routes. Politicians debated the constitutional questions raised. Military commanders wondered where their loyalties should lie. In Rome, Octavian received the reports with cold fury mixed with political satisfaction. Antony had overplayed his hand spectacularly. These grandiose gestures would alienate moderate Romans who might otherwise have supported him. The propaganda value was incalculable. Octavian's agents spread carefully crafted versions of events throughout Italy. Antony had betrayed Rome's interests for Egyptian gold. He had crowned foreign children as kings with Roman wealth. He had prostrated himself before a barbarian witch. The campaign of character assassination reached new heights of vicious effectiveness. But in Alexandria, celebration continued for days. The children were paraded through streets lined with cheering crowds. Coins were minted showing their new royal portraits. Temples offered prayers of thanksgiving for Egypt's expanded glory. The Golden Age seemed to have arrived at last. Cleopatra understood the risks they were taking better than her besotted lover. Roman pride was a dangerous force when aroused. Octavian would use these ceremonies as justification for war. The alliance between East and West might have to be defended with blood rather than diplomacy. She began secret preparations for the conflict she saw coming. Egyptian shipyards worked around the clock-building warships. Grain supplies were stockpiled in fortified cities. Diplomatic messages went out to potential allies throughout the Greek world. If war came, Egypt would be ready. Antony seemed intoxicated by his own generosity. He had given away an empire with the casual gesture of a god distributing favors. The children were his legacy, the kingdoms their inheritance. He was creating a dynasty that would endure for centuries. At least that was his dream. The reality was more complex and far more dangerous. Roman legions were loyal to commanders who rewarded them with land and loot. Egyptian gold could buy temporary allegiance, but Italian soil was what soldiers really wanted. Antony's Eastern orientation was weakening his support among his own troops. As winter approached, troubling reports arrived from the West. Octavian was moving against Antony's supporters in Italy. Roman senators were being forced to choose sides. The triumvirate that had governed Rome for a decade was finally collapsing into open hostility. The donations of Alexandria had been intended as a triumph, a celebration of love conquering political necessity, a demonstration that East and West could unite under enlightened leadership. Instead, they became the catalyst for the final civil war that would determine the shape of the ancient world. Can you picture Cleopatra that night, standing on her palace balcony? The city below sparkles with celebratory torches. Her children sleep peacefully in their beds, dreaming of the kingdoms they will inherit. But their mother stares westward across the dark sea, knowing that storm clouds are gathering on the horizon. The winter months following the donations brought ominous news with every ship from Italy. Octavian was methodically destroying Antony's reputation throughout the Roman world. His propaganda machine worked tirelessly to paint the Eastern Triumvirate as a traitor corrupted by foreign influence. Every generous gesture toward Egypt became evidence of betrayal. Picture the palace scribes working by lamplight, translating the latest dispatches from Rome. Their faces grew grave as they read Octavian's accusations. Antony was accused of planning to move the capital from Rome to Alexandria, of giving Roman provinces to barbarian children, of worshipping beast-headed gods instead of proper Roman deities. Cleopatra listened to these reports with growing concern. She understood Roman politics better than Antony realized. The people of Italy were proud of their conquests and jealous of their privileges. Any suggestion that foreigners might share in Roman glory would provoke fierce resistance. Octavian was playing to these deepest prejudices with masterful skill. More troubling were reports of military preparations. Octavian was calling up legions throughout the western provinces. Veterans who had fought for Caesar were answering his adopted son's summons. Ships were being built in Italian harbors. The machinery of war was grinding into motion with inexorable purpose. Antony seemed remarkably unconcerned by these developments. He was confident in his own military abilities and the wealth of Egypt. His eastern legions were battle-tested and loyal. Egyptian gold could hire additional mercenaries if needed. He had defeated Parthians and Armenians. Surely he could handle one ambitious boy. But Cleopatra's spies brought disturbing information about that ambitious boy. Octavian had grown from the sickly youth who had claimed Caesar's inheritance. Years of political warfare had hardened him into a formidable opponent. His public image was carefully crafted to appeal to traditional Roman values: duty, honor, piety, respect for ancestral customs. The queen began her own preparations with characteristic thoroughness. Egyptian shipyards echoed with the sound of hammers and saws as new warships took shape. The finest craftsmen in the Mediterranean were recruited to build vessels that combined speed with fighting power. If war came, Egypt's navy would be ready. Diplomatic missions were sent throughout the Greek world seeking allies. Many cities remembered Alexander's legacy and resented Roman domination. Egyptian gold and promises of autonomy could win support from those who yearned for independence. The East might unite against Western tyranny. Training intensified for both army and navy. Egyptian soldiers practiced formations and weapons drill. Sailors learned to coordinate their movements with split-second timing. The palace became a military headquarters where strategy was debated and tactics refined. Cleopatra participated in every discussion, her strategic mind as sharp as any general's. Spring brought the first open break between the triumvirs. Octavian formally stripped Antony of his powers and titles. The Senate, under pressure from the young Caesar, declared him an enemy of Rome. War was now inevitable. The final struggle for control of the Roman world was about to begin. Antony's response was swift and decisive. He divorced his Roman wife Octavia, Octavian's sister, and formally married Cleopatra according to Egyptian rites. The ceremony was magnificent, but also defiant. He was choosing East over West, love over political convenience, destiny over safety. Can you picture their wedding night? The palace was transformed into a garden of earthly delights. Rose petals carpeted marble floors. Golden lamps cast warm light on silk hangings. The scent of jasmine and myrrh perfumed the air. Two of the most powerful people in the world had pledged their lives to each other. But beyond the palace walls, the world was preparing for war. Roman legions marched toward assembly points. Ships loaded with supplies and weapons. Messengers carried orders across thousands of miles. The greatest military machine ever created was mobilizing for the conflict that would determine civilization's future. Cleopatra spent her days reviewing endless details of military preparation. Supply lines had to be secured. Allies had to be coordinated. Intelligence networks had to be expanded. She was not just a queen anymore, but a war leader responsible for her kingdom's survival. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders like a marble cloak. Her children provided moments of relief from these crushing burdens. Caesarion was now 14, old enough to understand the gravity of the situation. He asked intelligent questions about strategy and tactics. His mother began including him in some military discussions, preparing him for the leadership role he might inherit. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, were still children but aware that something momentous was happening. They saw their parents conferring with generals and admirals. They heard the sounds of military preparation echoing through the palace corridors. Their innocent games began to include toy soldiers and mock battles. Little Ptolemy Philadelphus was too young to understand, but even he sensed the tension in the air. His nurses sang softer lullabies. His meals came later as kitchen staff were reassigned to military duties. The entire palace reflected the kingdom's transformation from peace to war. Antony threw himself into military preparations with the energy of his younger days. He reviewed troops, inspected fortifications, planned campaigns. The soft life of Alexandria fell away like a discarded garment. The warrior who had conquered Armenia and Parthia was emerging again, ready for the greatest battle of his career. Messages flew between Alexandria and potential allies throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Kings and queens, city-states and tribal chieftains, all were courted for the coming struggle. Some pledged support immediately. Others demanded guarantees and bribes. A few declared neutrality, waiting to see which side would win. The first major decision involved where to fight the decisive battle. Antony favored a land campaign in Greece, where his legions could operate at maximum effectiveness. Cleopatra argued for a naval engagement, where Egypt's ships and wealth could tip the balance. Their strategic disagreement reflected deeper tensions about Eastern versus Roman approaches to warfare. As summer approached, scouts brought word that Octavian's forces were crossing the Adriatic Sea. Italian legions were landing on Greek shores. The enemy was choosing the time and place of battle. Antony and Cleopatra would have to respond to Octavian's initiative rather than seize it themselves. The lovers held a final strategy conference as the sun set over Alexandria's harbour. Maps covered every table in the war room. Generals and admirals offered their opinions. But ultimately, the decision rested with Antony and Cleopatra. They would sail west to meet their destiny, together as they had lived and loved, together as they would face whatever fate the gods had prepared. That night, Cleopatra walked through her palace one last time. She visited the children's rooms, kissing each sleeping face. She paused in the library where she had learned so much. She knelt in the chapel where she had prayed for guidance. This might be her final night in the city she loved more than life itself. The harbour was already bustling with activity as ships prepared for departure. Sails were checked and rechecked. Supplies were loaded with careful attention to weight distribution. Weapons were sharpened and polished. The greatest fleet ever assembled was preparing to sail toward the most important battle in human history. As dawn broke over the Mediterranean, Cleopatra stood on the deck of her flagship. The golden barge that had once carried her to meet Caesar, then to enchant Antony, now served as the command ship for her kingdom's fight for survival. The irony was not lost on her as waves lapped against the ornate hull. Antony joined her at the rail, his armor gleaming in the morning sunlight. Together they watched Alexandria's skyline shrink behind them. The lighthouse that had guided ships for centuries continued its eternal vigil. But the queen it had served was sailing toward an uncertain future. Can you feel the salt spray on your face as their ship cuts through the waves? The Mediterranean stretches endlessly ahead, blue as Egyptian lapis lazuli. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Octavian's fleet is waiting. The final act of this great drama is about to begin. The two greatest fleets in history faced each other across the azure waters of the Ambracian Gulf. On one side, Octavian's Roman navy stretched in perfect formation, their bronze rams glinting like teeth in a predator's smile. On the other, Antony and Cleopatra's Eastern alliance rode the gentle swells, their ships decorated with gold and purple like floating palaces. Picture yourself standing on the deck of Cleopatra's flagship as that fateful morning dawned. The air was still and heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Seabirds circled overhead, their cries the only sound breaking the ominous silence. The water reflected the morning sky like polished bronze, soon to be stained red with blood. Antony wore his finest armor, polished until it blazed like a mirror in the early light. But his face was troubled as he studied the enemy formation through the clear morning air. Octavian's admiral, Marcus Agrippa, was renowned for his tactical brilliance. The Roman ships were smaller but more maneuverable than the Eastern vessels. Speed might triumph over size in the coming battle. Cleopatra stood beside her lover, magnificent in her royal regalia. She had chosen to wear the crown of Egypt into battle, its golden cobra rearing defiantly above her brow. Her purple cloak snapped in the morning breeze like a banner of defiance. She was not just a queen watching a battle, but a warrior pharaoh ready to fight for her kingdom's survival. The Egyptian fleet was indeed impressive to behold. Massive quinqueremes with 5 banks of oars, towering catapults that could hurl stones the size of millstones, decks crowded with archers and marines. These were the most powerful warships ever built, floating fortresses designed to crush anything in their path. But Octavian's ships were built for different tactics, sleek Liburnians that could dart between the larger vessels like sharks among whales. Their bronze rams were positioned for maximum impact. Their crews were drilled to perfection in ramming attacks. What they lacked in size, they made up in speed and coordination. Can you hear the naval trumpets echoing across the water as both fleets prepared for battle? The haunting notes seemed to summon the very gods from their heavenly thrones. Mars, god of war, surely watched from above as Rome's greatest generals prepared to settle their differences with bronze and blood. The first phase of battle began slowly, almost hesitantly. Neither commander wanted to be first to attack, preferring to wait for their opponent to make a mistake. Ships maneuvered carefully, seeking advantageous positions. Captains shouted orders while crews strained at their oars. The dance of death was beginning. Antony commanded from the center of his formation, trying to coordinate the movements of hundreds of ships spread across miles of ocean. But communication was difficult in the chaos of naval warfare. Signal flags were hard to see through the forest of masts and sails. Trumpet calls were lost in the noise of creaking hulls and splashing oars. Cleopatra had positioned her squadron slightly behind the main battle line. Her ships carried Egypt's treasury and royal regalia. They were the kingdom's insurance policy, ready to escape if the battle went badly. But her presence also served as inspiration for the Eastern fleet. The living goddess was among them, sharing their dangers. The first collision came when an over-eager Roman captain rammed his Liburnian into the side of an Egyptian quinquereme. The bronze ram punched through seasoned oak like a spear through flesh. Water poured into the breach as the larger ship began to list. but the smaller Roman vessel was trapped in the hole it had created, easy prey for Egyptian marines. Soon the entire Gulf erupted in violence. Ships grappled and boarded each other like wrestlers locked in deadly embrace. Arrows flew in dark clouds that briefly obscured the sun. The clash of bronze on bronze rang out like thunder as weapons met armor and shield. The blue waters turned red with the blood of dying men. Antony fought bravely, his ship ramming 2 Roman vessels in quick succession. His marines were veterans of Eastern campaigns, hardened by years of warfare. They fought with the desperation of men who knew defeat meant death or slavery. Their war cries echoed across the water in a dozen languages. But gradually, the Roman advantage in speed and tactics began to tell. Agrippa's smaller ships darted in and out of the eastern formation, striking quick blows before escaping retaliation. One by one, the massive eastern vessels were being surrounded and overwhelmed. The tide of battle was turning against Antony and Cleopatra. From her flagship, Cleopatra watched the disaster unfolding with growing horror. Ships that had carried her hopes were sinking beneath the waves. Men who had sworn loyalty to Egypt were dying in the blood-stained water. The dream of Eastern Empire was dissolving like sea foam in the Mediterranean sun. The critical moment came when she saw Antony's ship surrounded by Roman vessels. Her lover was fighting heroically, but the odds were impossible. If he fell, Egypt would lose its greatest protector, and she would lose the man she loved. The decision she made in that instant would echo through history. Cleopatra ordered her squadron to break from the battle and sail south toward Egypt. Her captains were stunned by the command. Queens did not flee from battles, but she was thinking beyond the immediate conflict. If Egypt was to survive, its ruler must survive. Better to live and fight another day than die gloriously but uselessly. The sight of the Egyptian royal squadron fleeing the battle had a devastating effect on Eastern morale. If their goddess queen was abandoning the fight, what hope remained? Ship after ship began to withdraw from combat. What had been an orderly retreat became a rout as panic spread through the Eastern fleet. Antony saw Cleopatra's ships departing and faced the most agonizing choice of his life: stay and die honorably with his men, or follow the woman he loved into exile. Love triumphed over honor as it had so many times before. He transferred to a faster ship and pursued Cleopatra's squadron, leaving his fleet to its fate. The Battle of Actium was over almost before it had truly begun. Octavian's victory was so complete that many Eastern ships surrendered without fighting. The dream of East-West unity died in the waters of the Ambracian Gulf. The Roman Republic's last civil war had been decided in a single morning. Can you picture the scene as the survivors limped home? Broken ships listing in the swells, wounded men crying for water that might never come, the wreckage of a great fleet scattered across miles of empty ocean, and somewhere in that debris field, the hopes of 2 extraordinary lovers sinking beneath the indifferent waves. But Cleopatra and Antony had escaped to fight again. Their flagship raced southward with every sail set, pursued by the knowledge of defeat, but not yet by Octavian's ships. Behind them lay the wreckage of their dreams. Ahead lay Egypt and whatever final act their tragedy would require. The Queen stood at the stern, watching the battle smoke fade on the northern horizon. Tears streamed down her face, but her expression remained determined. She had saved her kingdom's treasure and her own life. Now she had to decide how to use both to secure Egypt's future. The game was not over yet. Antony joined her at the rail, his armor stained with salt spray and shame. He had abandoned his men to follow a woman. The guilt would torment him for the rest of his life. But looking at Cleopatra's proud profile, he knew he would make the same choice again. Love had conquered honor, but it had also saved them both. As the sun set behind them, painting the sea red as blood, their ship carried them toward Alexandria, toward one final desperate gamble, toward the end of an age and the beginning of another. The last pharaoh of Egypt was returning home to face her destiny. Alexandria received its defeated queen with a mixture of sorrow and defiant pride. The harbor, once filled with the mightiest fleet in the Mediterranean, now welcomed only a handful of battered survivors. But the great lighthouse still blazed its beacon across the waters, a symbol of Egypt's eternal endurance. Close your eyes and picture Cleopatra's return to her beloved city. No cheering crowds lined the waterfront this time. No flowers carpeted the streets. The palace guards stood at attention, but their faces reflected the gravity of defeat. Word of Actium had reached Alexandria ahead of their queen. Everyone knew the kingdom faced its darkest hour. The first priority was securing the children's safety. Caesarion, now 15, understood the danger they all faced. Octavian would never allow Caesar's son to live and potentially challenge his authority. The boy's very existence was a threat to the new order Octavian planned to impose on the Roman world. Cleopatra made swift arrangements to send Caesarion away from Alexandria. A trusted ship captain would carry him south through the Red Sea to India. There, among the kingdoms that had never known Roman rule, Caesar's son might build a new life far from Octavian's reach. The parting was heartbreaking for mother and son. Can you imagine that final embrace between Cleopatra and her eldest child? She held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, memorizing every detail of his beloved face. He was so much like his father, intelligent, brave, destined for greatness. But greatness was too dangerous now. Survival mattered more than glory. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, were still too young to understand fully what was happening. They sensed their mother's distress and clung to her robes with small, frightened hands. She tried to comfort them with gentle words, but her own voice trembled with emotion. How do you explain to children that their world is ending? Little Ptolemy Philadelphus, barely 3 years old, played happily with his toys while catastrophe gathered around him. His innocence was a blessing that Cleopatra envied. Soon enough he would learn about loss and betrayal. For now she wanted him to remain a child just a little longer. Antony threw himself into desperate military preparations. Messages were sent throughout the eastern provinces, calling for renewed resistance against Octavian's tyranny. Some cities responded with promises of support. Others maintained careful silence. Most were already calculating how to ingratiate themselves with the coming conqueror. The palace became a fortress as defenses were strengthened throughout the city. The great walls that had protected Alexandria for 3 centuries were reinforced with new artillery positions. The harbour entrances were blocked with chains and underwater obstacles. If Octavian wanted Egypt's capital, he would have to pay in blood. But even as they prepared for siege, both lovers knew the cause was hopeless. Egypt's fleet was destroyed. The Eastern allies were defeated or abandoning the losing side. Roman legions were marching across the desert from multiple directions. Time was running out like sand in an hourglass. Cleopatra began secret negotiations with Octavian through intermediaries, Perhaps some arrangement could be reached. Egypt had always been valuable to Rome. Surely the kingdom's wealth was worth more than the satisfaction of revenge. She was willing to abdicate if her children could be spared. Octavian's response was coldly pragmatic. He would accept Cleopatra's surrender and guarantee her life if she would betray Antony. The offer was both tempting and insulting. Save herself by destroying the man she loved. Preserve her life by sacrificing her honor. The choice revealed everything about both leaders' characters. The queen's rejection was swift and contemptuous. She would not purchase safety with treachery. If Octavian wanted Egypt, he would have to take it from her dead hands. The Ptolemaic dynasty would end with dignity intact, even if everything else was lost. Meanwhile, Antony was sinking deeper into despair and wine. The man who had once commanded half the Roman world now spent his days drinking and raging against fate. His few remaining friends watched helplessly as their leader destroyed himself with guilt and alcohol. The hero of a dozen battles was becoming a tragic ruin. Strange stories began circulating through Alexandria's streets. The god Dionysus, Antony's patron deity, had been seen leaving the city in the dead of night. Musicians swore they heard divine processions passing through empty squares. If the gods themselves were abandoning Alexandria, what hope remained for mortals? Cleopatra consulted the ancient oracles, seeking guidance from powers older than Rome. The Sibylline prophecies spoke of endings and transformations. The stars showed upheaval in the celestial sphere, but the messages were cryptic, offering more riddles than answers. The future remained hidden behind veils of divine mystery. As winter gave way to spring, Octavian's armies closed in on Alexandria like a tightening noose. His ships controlled the Mediterranean approaches. His legions marched across the desert from the east. Local commanders began surrendering their cities without resistance. The end was approaching with mathematical certainty. The lovers spent their final weeks together in a strange mixture of intimacy and formality. Public audiences continued as if the kingdom still had a future. Private moments were treasured like precious jewels, each one a memory to carry into whatever lay beyond death. They were living in a beautiful dream that would soon become a nightmare. Cleopatra began construction of her tomb in the palace complex. Egyptian tradition demanded that pharaohs prepare elaborate burial chambers, but this one had special significance. It would serve as her final refuge when capture became inevitable. The limestone walls were decorated with scenes of resurrection and eternal life. Inside the tomb, she gathered Egypt's greatest treasures: golden statues of the gods, chests filled with precious stones, rare manuscripts from the great library. If she must die, she would take Egypt's glory with her. Octavian might conquer the kingdom, but he would not plunder its soul. The final confrontation came as summer heat settled over the Nile Delta. Octavian's advanced scouts appeared on the hills overlooking Alexandria. The Roman eagle standards glinted in the morning sun like harbingers of doom. After months of preparation, the last battle was about to begin. Antony roused himself from his despair for one final charge. Leading a small force of cavalry, he rode out to meet the enemy. For a brief moment, the old fire burned in his eyes. The conqueror of Armenia was making his last stand, but courage alone could not overcome impossible odds. The skirmish was brief and decisive. Outnumbered 10-1, Antony's men were quickly overwhelmed. He fought like a hero from Homer's epics, his sword cutting down enemies even as they surrounded him. But heroism could not change the mathematics of warfare. He was forced to retreat to the city walls. That night, as Alexandria's defenders prepared for the final siege, a strange silence fell over the city. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. In the palace, Cleopatra sat beside her sleeping children, watching their innocent faces in the lamplight. Tomorrow would bring the end of everything she had lived for. Can you feel the weight of destiny pressing down on that final night? The last pharaoh of Egypt keeping vigil over her dying kingdom. The woman who had loved two of Rome's greatest generals, now facing the third alone. History itself was holding its breath, waiting to see how this extraordinary story would end. The dawn that broke over Alexandria on August 1st, 30 BCE, was unlike any other in the city's long history. Roman siege engines lined the hills surrounding the capital like metallic vultures. The harbour bristled with enemy ships flying the standards of Octavian. After 3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule, Egypt's independence was measured in hours, not days. Picture Cleopatra rising from her bed for the last time as Pharaoh of Egypt. Her servants dressed her with trembling hands in the finest silk and gold. Every ornament was carefully placed, every detail of her appearance perfected. If this was to be her final performance, she would leave the stage as magnificently as she had entered it. The palace corridors echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps as officials and servants fled or hid. Royal guards stood at their posts, but their faces showed the strain of impending defeat. Some had already slipped away in the night. Others remained out of loyalty or lack of anywhere else to go. Antony had barricaded himself in his study, drinking wine and composing what he believed would be his final letter to Octavian. His hand shook as he wrote. Whether from wine or emotion, it was impossible to tell. The man who had once shared power with Caesar was reduced to begging his former partner's adopted son for mercy. Reports reached the palace that several of Antony's remaining commanders had opened the city gates to Roman forces. Betrayal, that constant companion of civil war, had struck its final blow. Alexandria would not endure a siege. It would simply be occupied like any other conquered city. Cleopatra gathered her youngest children around her one last time. The twins, now 10 years old, clung to their mother's robes with frightened eyes. Little Ptolemy Philadelphus, still a toddler, played with golden toys while catastrophe closed in around him. She told them stories of their royal ancestors, trying to give them strength for the ordeal ahead. The sound of marching feet grew louder in the streets outside. Roman military discipline was imposing order on chaos as legions took control of key positions throughout the city. The methodical conquest was more frightening than any battle. It spoke of complete, inevitable victory. A messenger arrived with devastating news. Antony's remaining forces had surrendered without fighting. The man who had conquered Parthia and Armenia was now a general without an army. His military career, which had spanned decades and continents, had ended not with a glorious final battle, but with simple abandonment by his own men. Worse news followed quickly. Octavian had issued specific orders regarding the fate of Cleopatra's children. Caesarion, wherever he might be hiding, was to be hunted down and killed. The other children would be taken to Rome as trophies of victory. They would be paraded in Octavian's triumph before being strangled in the traditional manner. The Queen's composure finally cracked as she absorbed this information. Her babies, her precious children, were condemned to die for the crime of being born to her. All her careful plans for their safety had been anticipated and countered. Octavian was more thorough than she had imagined, but perhaps there was still one card left to play, one final gambit that might save at least some of what she held dear. Cleopatra had been preparing for this moment since her return from Actium. The tomb she had built was more than a burial chamber. It was a fortress and a negotiating position combined. She gave orders for the palace treasures to be moved to the tomb immediately. Chests of gold and precious stones, sacred artifacts from Egypt's temples, the crown jewels of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Everything of value that could be carried was transported to her final stronghold. More importantly, she ordered quantities of oil, pitch, and other flammable materials to be placed around the treasure. If Octavian wanted Egypt's wealth, he would have to negotiate for it. Otherwise, she would burn it all, rather than let it fund further Roman expansion. The treasure would be her hostage in final negotiations. Antony appeared in the doorway of her chamber, swaying slightly from wine, but determined to speak. He had made his decision. Rather than face capture and the humiliation of being paraded through Rome's streets, he would die by his own hand. It was the last honorable choice remaining to him. They embraced for what both knew would be the final time. 17 years had passed since their first meeting in Tarsus. They had shared love, power, children, and dreams of empire. Now they would share death, though separately. Their story was ending as it had to end, with Roman swords waiting outside their door. Cleopatra made her own final preparations as reports arrived of Roman soldiers approaching the palace complex. She dismissed her remaining servants, giving them permission to flee or surrender as they chose. Only her most trusted attendants remained, Iris and Charmian, women who had served her since childhood. The three women entered the tomb as afternoon shadows lengthened across Alexandria. The heavy stone door was sealed from within, leaving them in the golden glow of oil lamps, surrounded by the accumulated wealth of Egypt. Here, among treasures that sparkled like captured stars, the last pharaoh would make her final stand. Hours passed in strange calm. They could hear the sounds of systematic search echoing through the palace above. Roman voices called orders in Latin while boots tramped through marble halls. Octavian's men were claiming their prize with typical efficiency. News reached them through secret passages that Antony was dead. He had fallen on his sword rather than face capture. The Roman who had shared Caesar's bed and Cleopatra's throne had chosen death over dishonor. His body lay cooling in chambers where he had once planned the conquest of Parthia. Can you picture Cleopatra receiving this final blow? The man she had loved for nearly 2 decades was gone. Her children faced death or slavery. Her kingdom was lost. Egypt's 3,000-year independence was ending in her lifetime. Yet she sat among golden treasures with the dignity of a goddess facing twilight. Roman soldiers found the entrance to the tomb as evening fell. Their torches cast dancing shadows on stone walls as they hammered at the sealed door. But before they could break through, one final drama would be played out in that lamplit chamber deep beneath Alexandria's palace. Cleopatra had prepared for this moment with the same careful attention she had given to every other crisis of her remarkable life. A small chest contained the instruments of her chosen death, not Roman steel, but something far more Egyptian, something that would allow her to die as pharaoh rather than prisoner. The basket seemed to contain figs fresh and tempting in the lamplight. But hidden beneath the fruit was Egypt's gift to its dying queen. The cobra, sacred serpent of the pharaohs, coiled like a living crown waiting to deliver its divine kiss. Death would come swiftly and without pain, with dignity befitting the last daughter of the gods. As the Roman hammering grew louder, Cleopatra took her place on the golden couch that would serve as her deathbed. Dressed in royal regalia, crowned with the uraeus of divine authority, she looked exactly what she was, the living embodiment of Egypt itself preparing for transformation. The serpent's bite was swift and sure. Poison flowed through royal veins as smoothly as the Nile through fertile fields. Cleopatra's last breath carried prayers to Isis and Osiris, the divine couple who would welcome her to eternal life. The final pharaoh was going home to the gods who had created Egypt in the dawn of time. Can you see her there in the golden lamplight, beautiful even in death, crowned with divine authority, surrounded by the treasures of the ancient world? She had lived as she chose and died as she chose. Neither Roman conqueror nor cruel fate had been able to break her magnificent spirit. The Roman soldiers who finally broke into Cleopatra's tomb found a scene that would haunt their dreams for years to come. There, on a golden couch amid treasures beyond counting, lay the most famous woman in the ancient world. Death had taken nothing from her beauty or dignity. She looked like a sleeping goddess waiting for resurrection. Close your eyes one final time and picture that sacred chamber. Oil lamps flickered against walls decorated with scenes of eternal life. Golden statues of Egyptian gods stood sentinel over their fallen queen. The air was heavy with the scent of precious oils and incense. It was a pharaoh's burial chamber, prepared for a journey to the afterlife. Octavian himself came to view the body of his greatest enemy. The young man who would soon become Augustus Caesar stood silently before Cleopatra's bier. Here was the woman who had enchanted Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, who had ruled the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean, who had come closer than anyone to uniting East and West under a single crown. But even in death, she had defeated him in one important way. She had denied him the triumph of parading her through Rome's streets. The greatest prize of his victory would never be displayed to Roman crowds. She had chosen her own ending to her extraordinary story. The children's fate was mixed. Caesarion was found and executed as Octavian had ordered. Caesar's son could not be allowed to live and potentially challenge imperial authority. But the other 3 children were spared death and taken to Rome. There they were raised by Octavian's sister Octavia, Antony's abandoned Roman wife. Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus grew up as Roman citizens rather than Egyptian royalty. The boys disappeared from history, probably dying young, as so many children did in the ancient world. But Cleopatra Selene survived and eventually became Queen of Mauritania, ruling a North African kingdom that maintained some of her mother's legacy. Egypt itself became a Roman province. Its independence ended after 3 millennia. The Ptolemaic dynasty that had begun with Alexander's general ended with Cleopatra's death. But the kingdom's wealth and culture continued to influence the Roman Empire for centuries to come. Alexandria remained a great center of learning and commerce under Roman rule. The library and museum continued their work, though they never again achieved the glory of Cleopatra's time. Scholars still came from across the known world to study in the city by the sea. The palace where Cleopatra had lived and loved was converted to Roman administrative offices, but local people continued to tell stories of their last queen, how she had been visited by gods, how she had turned enemies into lovers, how she had died like a pharaoh, choosing her own destiny rather than accepting defeat. These stories spread throughout the ancient world and beyond. Cleopatra became a legend, a symbol of female power and intelligence. Writers and poets celebrated her beauty and wisdom. Artists painted her image for emperors and kings. The woman who had failed to unite East and West in life succeeded in capturing human imagination for all time. But perhaps the most fitting monument to Cleopatra was the dream she represented, the vision of a world where different cultures could blend rather than conquer each other, where love could triumph over politics, where intelligence and beauty could overcome brute force. Though she failed in her lifetime, this dream would inspire others across the centuries. In the gentle darkness of your bedroom tonight, remember the girl who grew up in Alexandria's palace, who learned to speak 9 languages and rule the richest kingdom on earth, who loved 2 of history's greatest men and bore children to carry on their legacy, who faced death with courage and died with dignity intact. Remember how she sailed to meet Caesar wrapped in a carpet, how she enchanted Antony on a golden barge, how she fought for her kingdom's independence against impossible odds, how she chose death over surrender when all seemed lost. The Nile still flows as it did in her time, carrying life through the desert to the sea. The stars she watched from her palace roof still shine in the Egyptian sky. The Mediterranean waves still whisper against Alexandria's shores, carrying echoes of her name across the water. Her story reminds us that even in defeat there can be victory. Even in death there can be immortality. Cleopatra lost her kingdom, but won eternal fame. She failed to save her dynasty, but succeeded in capturing hearts and minds across 2,000 years of human history. Tonight, as you drift toward peaceful sleep, let her courage inspire your dreams. Let her intelligence guide your thoughts. Let her love of learning kindle your own curiosity about the vast, wonderful world around us. Picture her one last time, not as she died in that lamplit tomb, but as she lived in the fullness of her power, standing on her palace balcony as the sun sets over Alexandria. The evening breeze stirs her royal robes. Golden jewelry catches the last rays of sunlight. In her dark eyes burns the eternal flame of human ambition and divine grace. She was Cleopatra, the 7th Philopator, last pharaoh of Egypt, queen of kings, beloved of Isis, chosen of the gods. She was a daughter, a mother, a lover, a leader. She was mortal and divine, human and legendary, historical and mythical. Most of all, she was unforgettable. Sleep now and dream of golden barges sailing down the eternal Nile. Dream of palaces filled with wisdom and beauty. Dream of a queen who loved greatly and dared everything. Dream of Cleopatra, whose story will enchant the world as long as humans remember the power of love, courage and intelligence combined. Rest well, knowing that somewhere in the realm of memory and myth, the last pharaoh of Egypt continues her eternal reign, not over armies and treasures, but over imagination and inspiration, not for a few years of earthly time, but for all the ages yet to come. The golden barge sails on through starlit waters. The Queen's laughter echoes across centuries. Her story lives forever in the dreams of those who dare to love greatly and dream boldly. Sleep peacefully now. Let Cleopatra's courage watch over your rest. Let her wisdom guide your dreams. Let her eternal spirit remind you that some things are indeed immortal. Love, beauty, intelligence, and the human capacity to inspire others across the vast reaches of time. The story ends as all the best stories do, not with an ending, but with a beginning. For every time someone tells Cleopatra's tale, she lives again. Every time someone remembers her courage, she triumphs anew. Every time someone dreams of adventure and romance, she sails once more down the timeless Nile toward destiny. Good night. Sleep well. Dream of queens and pharaohs, of golden barges and starlit seas, of love that conquers death and stories that never truly end. The last pharaoh of Egypt whispers her final blessing across the centuries. May your dreams be as vast as the desert sky. May your love be as deep as the Nile. May your courage shine as eternal as the stars. Sleep now. The ancient world rests peacefully in memory's gentle embrace. Tomorrow will bring new stories, new adventures, new dreams to explore. But tonight belongs to Cleopatra, the queen who made herself immortal through the sheer force of her extraordinary life. Rest well, dear listener. Let the gentle rhythm of the Nile carry you to peaceful slumber. Let the warm desert breeze cool your thoughts. Let the golden light of Egypt's eternal sun illuminate your dreams. The story of Cleopatra ends here, but her legend continues forever. In the silence between heartbeats, in the space between sleeping and waking, in the realm where history becomes myth and queens become eternal. Sweet dreams await you in the land of the pharaohs. Sleep now and sail with Cleopatra into the golden sunset of peaceful rest.